Hey, everybody. Welcome. Happy Sunday. Hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to Advantage College Planning Facebook Live. I am Gina and I host our Facebook Lives. I'm usually here once every couple weeks talking about different elements of the college application process to help reduce the stress level and keep you up to date on information that you need to know at the time you need to know it. And so tonight I'm really excited to be joined by my colleague, Lindsey. Welcome, Lindsey.
Hi.
So, yay. I'm excited for you to be here. So Lindsey and I are going to chat a little bit tonight about college list. So it is that time of year for juniors to be thinking about the schools that are going to be on their list for when they apply to college next fall. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about what that process looks like, how to make sure that your students are building a college list so that they can have really great options to choose from in the spring of their senior year. So if you can hear me okay, you can give me a thumbs up. Definitely let us know where you're tuning in from and maybe what year your student is. That's always really helpful to know so we can make sure we're giving you information that is most relevant to you and where you and your students are in this journey. And we will have time at the end for questions. Awesome. All right. So let's just jump right in. We thought it would be helpful to give you some context about what does it mean when we and maybe other college consultants or other people that you're hearing from are talking about the importance of having a balanced college list. Like, what does that mean? How do I know if my list is balanced? So, Lindsey, when you're talking with your students and families about that, how do you frame that conversation?
Yeah. First and foremost, I think of it from the perspective of selectivity. So when we think about balance, we want to make sure that students are applying to schools at all ranges of selectivity, because we know that the college admissions process has become even more competitive and, in fact, more selective. We need to make sure that students are applying to schools where we feel really comfortable that they're a really strong applicant, one that the admissions office is going to be so excited about offering admission to. And then keeping those schools on the list and rounding it out with other schools where the student is in with all competitive applicants. And the range of selectivity is so low that it really feels like almost like a lottery, right? Where every student who applies for admission has amazing credentials, academic profiles that are stellar, that are, doing all these amazing things. And the college has some institutional priorities that they use to offer admission. So we want to make sure that the list that a student is applying to has a range of those schools. Really strong candidate. And then, well, we'll see what happens. We'll put our best foot forward.
Awesome. And so when a student is building a college list, we definitely think about selectivity, but are there other factors we should think of other than just what's the admissions range or how does my student match up to the admissions criteria for this school?
Yeah, and I love what we do when we work with students, Gina. Isn't it so fun to build the list around their key criteria? Like, we focus on the things that matter most to them. Is this an academic environment in which I'm going to thrive? Does this have a community in which I know I'll be an engaged member of? And does this have, activities that I want to participate in? So when we create the list using that key criteria, then every college is going to be one that a student is excited about applying to. But sometimes that key criteria can limit a student and create too few options. And we really want to make sure that students have choices. I had an example of a student last year who they were really excited about going far from home. And a majority of the students' colleges on their list were about 1,000 miles away. Like, this was
really far from home.
Really far away. And then, things in the family kind of shifted and changed. And by winter and almost spring of the student's senior year, she started to feel like, I don't know that I have any options closer to home. And I'm a little worried about being that far. I think I'm going to need to come home more frequently than I anticipated. So we needed to balance out her list with some options that were closer to home. So I think thinking about the other criteria beyond selectivity and focusing on the other things that matter to students and families makes a lot of sense too. I think you also had some other things that you think about too. What are some of those things?
Yeah, a big thing that comes up for me with my students sometimes is around the financial kind of range of how much it can cost to go to college. And so, sometimes students will come in and they'll be, really high achieving student and have really high goals in terms of which types of schools they want to be applying to. And they're strong competitive applicants for those schools, which is really great. But then, at the end of the day, when the admissions decisions come in and they have a lot of great options, if those schools don't necessarily come through with financial aid offers or scholarship offers that the student was hoping for, then it's often that I have students who choose, an in-state school, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than one of these more selective private schools, because when they start looking at what their investment will be, they realize, I think this is actually a better plan for me. And for my family. And so I think cost and making sure that you have some schools that are a high chance of admission, mm-hmm. but also high probability that it's a financial fit for our family is really important to have on the list as well. But I tell students, shouldn't put any schools on your list that you wouldn't actually want to go to, right?
Exactly.
It doesn't make sense. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And so I think that's why a lot of homework on the beginning end of the college search can create a more relaxed approach when it comes time to applying, because then the students are like, yeah, I've done my homework. I've looked at so many options that I know that all of these schools are going to be the right fit for me in different ways. I had a student who in the end she got into all the schools on her list, but she chose to enroll at the school that was not the most selective. And actually it was the one that was most that offered admission to the most amount of students. And she chose to attend that school because she got into the honors program. And she knew there was a particular study abroad program that she was really excited about attending. So she did a lot of homework, together, which was really fun. We got to do a lot of research, and we put schools on her list that were in the, high chance of admission, but she really wanted to go to because of certain things. And I think that when families can really be more open-minded about this process and approach it with this idea that, yeah, we're going to create some opportunities here. We're really going to dive deeply into this search and not rely on just, outside sources that, rank colleges, and look beyond that, they can really find schools that are going to meet that student's criteria in so many different ways. And I think that's what makes for a more, the word joyful came to my mind just all of a sudden. I don't know that I've ever used the word joyful in the admissions process, or
maybe that should be your next process. You should write a book. Joyful.
I know, right? Let's embrace joy in this process. I don't, maybe I'm just feeling joyful today. I don't know what it is, but I think it can be a joyful process if it's balanced, and if it's like, yeah, I know that I'm doing all the right things, and I feel really good about this. And maybe I know I'm not going to get into all the schools on my list, but the ones I'm going to get into, I'm so excited about.
Yes, that is perfect. I love that. So when we're thinking about, once we have all these schools, right, and we start having schools the students are getting excited about that, and for us, that process can start as early as 8th grade, right? We start working with students when they're really young sometimes. And so they'll come in with ideas about schools they're really excited about. And it's great. Everything's on the table, right? What's interesting to you? What schools are you interested in? What do you want to do? What do you want to experience? And so, but once we start getting closer to, in middle part of junior year, that's when we need to start putting schools into these different categories, mm-hmm. so that we can start to see, okay, how is our list looking? Do we need to balance it out anywhere? Do we have any holes in our list? And so when we're thinking about balancing the college list, there are a few different things that we do and some things that families can do to help categorize if we're thinking about it from a selectivity standpoint. What are some of your go-tos?
Yeah, I think that's really important because it's hard. It's hard to get real data in the admissions process. It's hard mm-hmm. to understand the real data too, because there are sometimes nuances that can impact selectivity ranges. So, and just this process can feel really muddy to families because not everything is black and white. So I think it's important for, first, when you're doing some college research, go directly to the college's website, go to the admissions page, see what data and statistics you can glean from the admissions office page, but then also use resources like one of my favorites is the common data set. All colleges need to report data to get like streamlined information so that we understand that, and then see how things like admissions deadlines impact selectivity. It might be easier to be admitted if you apply early decision, which is that binding deadline that students can apply to one college. If the college offers early decision and it's their top choice, it can give them an advantage in the admissions process. It can be easier to get in if they're applying ED. And you don't know that just looking at the overall like acceptance rate as a whole. That can skew things in different ways. It can also make things for the regular decision applicants even more selective. It's like, okay, this school had an acceptance rate of 8%, but that was calculating early decision applicants as well as regular applicants. And in fact, the regular applicant pool was only offered admission at 3%. And so it's like, oh my goodness. So I love the common data set because it does break out by deadline. And I think that's really helpful. What are some of the things that you use, Gina?
Yeah. So I love that you're talking about going directly to the college website first. That's definitely something I use because common data set is great, but the tricky thing about common data set, and this is just the nature of the business that we're in, is that it's not always most up to date for the most previous year, right? It's usually a good year or so behind. And we see admissions trends change pretty dramatically sometimes from one year to the next. And so definitely going to the college's website, I think, is really helpful. Another thing that I really make sure to think about too is this a school where students have to apply to a specific major? Because if that's the case, then we also need to find out if the specific major the student wants to apply to is an impacted major or a major that has many more applicants than they have space. And sometimes that information will be on a college website. Sometimes if you go to that majors page within the college website, that major may have some additional admissions requirements, which could be in some cases a portfolio, right, for a design student. But in other cases, it might be a higher level of minimum academic requirement to even be considered than for the general population. Or maybe for some majors, you have to submit test scores, even though the school is test optional.
Right.
And so, those kinds of things can also really skew where a school falls for a student. The other thing that I tell students and families to do is when you're touring the colleges, which you should be doing, you can ask admissions officers these types of questions, right? But you can ask about specific majors. Is the average admissions rate general for all students, or is there a separate admissions rate for the major I'm interested in? When I apply, do I have to apply to a specific major? Will I just be considered for general admission to the university? I think that's a really important piece to know, because some majors are very impacted and can have a much lower admissions rate than what you're even seeing on the common data set. Or like Lindsay said, that data is not broken out. So it can look like, oh, this school has a 50% admissions rate. Great. And then actually the admissions rate to your major is in the single digits.
Exactly.
So that can definitely skew things. Yeah. There is, I'm going to share this screen. So there are some varying factors that students student parents should know about that colleges are using. So this data is from NACAC, the National Association for College and Admissions Counseling. That's our national professional organization. And so they compiled this data from 2023. They looked at using the common data set and using information from colleges across the country. How important are these specific factors in the admissions process? And as you can see, the top most important factors do revolve around academics. So yes, colleges are more holistic and they're reviewing all parts of your student's application, their activities, their letters of recommendation, all of those things. But the most important factor for the majority of schools will be the level of rigor of the courses that your student has taken within the context of what's available at their high school and the grades that they've earned in those courses. That's at the top. And then right under that, look at that, number 4 is positive character. So which I love, right? So reading your students' essays and kind of thinking about how will they contribute to the community. So it's important to know that if you look at the academic average of admitted students, and if your student's kind of falling on the lower end, sometimes families will think, oh, but it's a high chance of admission because I know that they review extracurricular activities and my student's an extracurricular rock star. And that's awesome. And that may have a positive impact, but that doesn't necessarily move the needle into having a huge impact, changing the student's admissions odds. Some things that you should know about that we always highlight too is that these factors over here are known in the admissions world as hooks or kickers, or some kind of institutional priority that changes from year to year that you likely will know nothing about what that school is holding as a priority. But those are also some things that can impact an admissions decision that your student receives. And so because there are all of these factors, plus a lot of these that you have no control over, geographic diversity, right? Or admitting students from a certain state. If a school's mission is to admit students from their state and you're an out-of-state student, you know, that's not something that's your fault. That's not something that you can control. It's just, it is what it is, right? So these are some of the things that we have to keep in mind as we are thinking about how we would categorize if a school is high, medium, or low chance of admission. So why are we bothering to make an entire conversation about this? Why is this so important? Why do so many admissions professionals talk about a balanced college list? Why is that so important? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's so important just to have options. I know, when students start to receive their admissions decisions, it's really an important part of their admissions process to start to receive those decisions and say, okay, this is the group of schools that I got into, and this is the group of schools where I didn't get in. And if that group of schools that I got into is only one, then that's not options, that's an option. So we want to make sure that students have choices. And I think at the end of the day, especially when we think about, I just noticed it, and I think this is why we love the work that we do, Gina, is watching students change and grow in the amount of time that we get to work with them. Even so much change happens between August of senior year and May 1st of senior year. And it's like, well, that I'm a different person now. Like all of a sudden, like I want different things, I have different needs. So having as many options as possible comes from having a balanced list. If the list isn't balanced and the student doesn't have admissions choices, then at the end of the day, they don't have any options. And that's really hard.
Yeah, I think about it a lot as return on investment. I know parents think about return on investment a lot, and they talk to me about that a lot in terms of picking the college major, right? Like how much money are we spending and kind of what are you going to be earning when you get out? But I look at the admissions process as what's your ROI. So it costs money to submit each of those applications, right? And yes, most of the school students are applying to are on the Common App, but at this point, the only part of the Common App that is common is the student's name, address, phone number, and optional demographic information. Like that's the least part. That takes us maybe 15 minutes to go through if the student knows their zip code. Okay, like that's super easy. All of the other information that the students have to do is what's time consuming. And that's because all of these schools have added so much other information that they as a specific institution want from the student that they have to fill out for all of these schools, plus all of the essays, right? It's a lot of hoops to jump through, and it's a lot of time and effort and again, money for all of these applications. So I want to make sure students have a good return on their investment. You put in hard work over the last 12 years of school. You're putting in all this time and effort and energy and money into submitting these applications. I want to make sure that you've got something good to choose from. We all like to feel like we have some control over our lives. And I don't know about you, but after working with teenagers for about 25 years, I can say that they don't like it when you tell them what they have to do, right? They like to have some choice, or at least the illusion of choice over their life.
Yeah, and they should. Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So that's really important. So how many schools, when you're making lists with your students, how many schools do you think are enough?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the student for sure, because there are definitely reasons why a college list of just 4 or 5 schools is perfect, right? I have no problem with that. And then I have other students where that is just not appropriate and they need more options. I think that it's about that balance and not having too many schools at the top. So if we look at those schools as the low chances of admission, and when it comes time to fall of senior year, I like students to really understand what that means. Like, okay, this means that most likely you aren't getting in. Like, I don't know how many times to say that, right? Like, most likely this isn't going to happen. And if we have like maybe 2 or 3 of those schools, perfect, because that's appropriate. I think it's totally fine for students to have schools on their list where most likely they aren't getting in. But I think any more than 2 or 3, then when they do start to receive those rejection, notifications, that's hard. It's hard to get rejected over and over and over again, which is what happens if the list has maybe 6 or 7 low chance of admission. Most likely you aren't getting in, so most likely you're getting rejected, and that's hard. So I think no more than 2 or 3. And then there are schools where we think their student is a solid candidate, but they're getting more and more selective over time. So we'll have to see what it looks like this year. Medium chance. And so I think that's appropriate for like 4, 5. And then at least 3, I think, of schools where they have a strong chance of getting admitted. Yeah, most likely you are getting in. Most likely, yes. Most likely, yes.
I think that's such a good point about how it feels to get those letters. And I would also add in wait list and spring admit. Yeah. So these are some other things that can happen. And sometimes, you should know too, that with those medium chance of admission, medium doesn't mean definitely yes.
Right.
Medium could mean yes, could mean no, could mean wait list, which is maybe, right? If we have enough room, we might offer you an opportunity. And then there's spring admission, which some schools have started adding this in as an option, saying, we don't have room for you to start in the fall. But if you would like to go work for a couple months, maybe take a couple of classes at a community college, depends on the school, you could do that and then join us in January. Yeah. And, for some students, some students, they feel really excited about that. Some students would feel like that's also like a no, right? Yeah. Because at the end of the day, that doesn't include an option for you for fall, right? Yeah. So I've definitely have had some students where those early decisions that come back are like, yes, yes, yes. And it feels so good. And then those more selective ones that come out in late March, it's a big roll of like, no. Right. And sometimes those are the students too, who say to me, oh, well, and I know you get this too, like, I'm just going to apply to this one for fun.
For fun.
Yeah, I'm going to write these 5 really hard 650 word essays to a school that I have that has a 3% acceptance rate just for kicks, just to see what happens, And as much as students can tell themselves, like, I don't care, it's just for fun, I know I probably won't get in. After you devote the amount of time it takes to submit one of those applications, you're invested.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So keeping that list honed in and intentional is really important.
Absolutely.
So let's give you some tips to help. Here, so we have different things that, we've seen over the years. Lindsey and I have been in admissions world for a long time. Lindsey has been in admissions since the start of her career.
Yeah.
Because all Lindsey has ever done is work in admissions related work, which is really cool. I've worked with teenagers since the beginning of my career, right? So we've seen some things over the last 20 plus years. So what are your top tips for helping? How can parents help in this process?
I think being as open-minded as possible. And I also think that applies to schools that maybe parents have had a bias towards, or, maybe it's a rival of their alma mater. And so they have a hard time accepting it. So I think being as open-minded as possible is the best way that a parent can help the student create a list that reflects the student's choices. And then I also think encouraging the student to be really thoughtful about the research ahead of time. It does take some work. I mean, I love the work that we get to do with students, because then it's us, like, we get to do that instead of mom, like, saying, oh my gosh, would you just research the education department at the school? Well, when I do, it's really fun. I mean, Mom, you might have a good time with it too, but, so I think that doing that research ahead of time helps, again, get excited about a school that you might not have given a fair chance to.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that, we're all coming into any situation with kind of a preconceived notion, but I think it is important to know that every 4 years, a college campus completely changes. Like the whole population recycles every 4 years. And so I think it's important to know that like the vibe of a campus, the culture of a campus, even the programs that they offer can all be very different, even from just a few years ago, let alone maybe when we were students or when you were a student.
Exactly.
And so going and visiting that college campus and taking a tour with an open mind is super important, because otherwise you're probably going off of old information. At the very least, there's probably at least some kind of new program or new initiative or something going on that you weren't aware of that would be probably helpful for you to know as you're making a decision on if this is a good fit or not. But definitely visit it. I mean, there are schools that even within our UNC system in North Carolina that have, I hear parents say, oh, that's a commuter school, or that's this kind of school. And it's like, well, maybe that was true 10 years ago. But if you go now, it's very different. And if you're not touring and you're not going to the info sessions, you're not hearing what they're doing, then you're not getting that information. Yeah. I think the other thing I think is important for parents to keep in mind with that open-mindedness is that admissions rates change. Just like the campus culture can change, the admissions rates really can change. And so for a lot of schools that maybe were a high chance of admission when you were applying to college, or, we were applying to college, they're not a high chance of admission anymore. We've seen schools change within a year. We'll put it on a student's list as like, oh yeah, this is probably a high chance of admission school based on previous criteria. And then boom, no, it's not. They're admitting 24% of their out-of-state applicants. Okay, that was new, right? So like these things happen. And so, COVID really had a big shift on things. And so, right before this webinar, I pulled some data from Common Data Set. And, if we look at Northeastern, right? Like Northeastern up in Boston, they had an admissions rate in 2020 about 18%. So still very selective. But last year, they're down to 6%.
Yeah, crazy.
Right? University of Tennessee at Knoxville, in 2020, they had a 79% acceptance rate. Last year, it was 34%. So jumping categories. And Auburn down in Alabama, great school, right? Lots of our students like Auburn have that on their list. 85% acceptance rate in 2020, 39% acceptance rate this year. Very different. So some schools might stay kind of similar, but there are these big changes. And so back to our point earlier about going to the admissions pages and getting that information, that's going to help you not be blindsided as much as possible by information that maybe you didn't know. Yeah. So once you've got a little bit of a list, what do you suggest parents do at that point?
Yeah, I think at that point, I would have, I guess, really just once the list is there, revisiting and maybe rethinking about like what is most likely and, like where that can come and how that can shift.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Great. Awesome. So I think my screen froze. Yeah. That's a great picture.
It threw me off for a minute. I was like, is she there?
Yeah. So I can't click on anything else right now. I don't know why my screen is frozen. But that's a great picture of me. Lindsay looks great. But the bottom line, I'm refreshing. It refreshed. Dave, can you hear me?
I can hear you still.
Okay, great. So we're just going to keep going. Great. So the bottom line is when you are thinking about the college list and you are, thinking about creating this list with your student, it's really important to, it's really important to make sure that it's balanced. It's really important to make sure that you've got options. That's the main thing. Create options. There was a recent blog post by Rick Clark from Georgia Tech, and I love an analogy. So he had a great analogy about college admissions. And so he was saying that, putting putting a bunch of colleges on your list that you have no interest in going to, but you're planning on applying to them anyway, is like going into a store that sells a lot of jeans and just throwing jeans in your cart that you would never wear. Jeans that aren't your style, jeans that are 7 sizes too big, jeans that are out of your price point, just to make sure you have options. But it's like you never would wear those. So don't do that with colleges. Make sure that you've got schools on your students list that they're actually interested in and could be a good fit and meet their fit factors. So we'll open it up for questions and answers. But in the meantime, I'll let you know I will be back on June 2nd at 7 o'clock again to get a jump start, thinking about getting a jump start on college applications this summer. So some tips for how to do that. And hopefully by then my camera will be working again and all will be well. You never know what's going to happen when you're on Facebook Live. You have to kind of roll with it. Yeah. But if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the comments. We are happy to answer them. And as always, if you found this to be helpful and interesting, go ahead and definitely check out the other videos that are on here on all different kinds of topics. You also can find great resources on our website, advcp.com. We have a fantastic blog, fantastic podcast. It is recently ranked in the top 10% of podcasts, I'll have you know. So definitely go and check that out to get more information about college planning. But thanks so much for joining us tonight. And thank you for joining me, Lindsey.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.